And the same thing when, for an ID for like a college student, their address can change every 6 months or so. Is that going to be just validating who they are, or are they going to be looking at the address on the card compared to the address on the voter registration?
Senator Stuchek, right now, the bill as drafted does not require any of the IDs to be valid.
Okay, so what you're saying is like an expired ID that was valid at some point would still suffice because it's just proving that person is who they are, is that correct?
What is the thought behind whether the ID is valid or not?
The purpose of the photo is to prove that you are who you're saying you are. With respect to the address, you're right, those things can change. But the purpose of showing that photo identification is simply to enable someone to look at you and to look at that picture to ensure that you are who you're saying you are.
Further discussion? Senator?
Well then, just stay on that point for a minute before I go to another one. Then what happens when somebody at the polling place says, wait a minute, this isn't your address? So how do I know that you're the John Doe that lives in this precinct when your address is different?
The registration is how they determine the address. The picture is how they determine you are who you say you are.
So if the ID has an address different than your registration has, you ignore it.
Senator, I believe that could be a basis for a challenge on election.
So then you wouldn't ignore it. So it would raise,
I'm sorry.
I'm just following up, so it would raise a question about the legitimacy of that person's ability to vote because they had shown them a valid ID, but it didn't say what they wanted it to say, although they're a valid voter.
My guess is they go to the registration documents. Look, Senator Brown and Senator Tillman.
Well, when you vote now, they ask for your address. Will that take care of that issue, or will the ID now trump that? I think that's the point you're trying to get to.
Yeah. Staff?
The bill as drafted does not amend the current law that requires a voter presenting information to state their name and address upon being asked by the poll worker for that information.
Senator Brown, follow up.
That was the question. So that's still in place.
Yes, sir.
Senator Tillman.
People move all the time. If you're listed on the registration data that they've got, the Board of Elections, whether your address is changed or not is immaterial. But if you're not who that picture looks like, you got a problem. We've never had a problem with the addresses can quickly be checked out with your registration. People move all the time. So I don't think that's a big point as far as I'm concerned.
Further discussion or questions?
At one point, there was some discussion about the problem of somebody registering and then they get married and have a name change and the driver's license is issued in a married name. How did you resolve that? Because when they show up and their name is on the photo ID is different. How did you resolve that?
Senator Gladfelder, I don't recall, I don't recall the details behind that question.
How would that work under the bill?
The bill does not address that issue. The bill does say that the county issues photo ID that's issued by the County Board of Elections, if you don't have a driver's license, is valid as long as you remain at that address and remain registered to vote.
Senator Nesbitt.
I'm a little bit at a loss as to how to phrase this question because I'm not sure who we're after here. So let's assume there's some conspiracy out here to steal an election. And we're going to solve it all with a photo ID. Have we reached the point in technology where people cannot create false IDs?
Senator Ness, I guess I would respond to that question by saying we're not after anyone or at all, any group or any individual with respect to this bill. I'll state what I have said several times in House meetings on the House floor. I think this bill is as much to restore the confidence for the person who goes to vote every time to ensure that no one else votes on their behalf. That's what I think the bill also is very much intended to do. So I don't necessarily...
So you think people are voting for other people? Is that what we're after here?
I think by ensuring that the elections officials have the ability to prove that the voter is who they present to be, they're giving the confidence to the person voting that no one else is voting on their behalf.
Follow-up,
Well,
Senator.
the question was, that's fine, have we reached a point in the modern age where we can keep people from falsifying identification cards? Hell, when I was in high school, you could get a driver's license. It says you were 21. Oh, no. I've never done that.
Good morning, I apologize for being late. The answer, sir, is no. You can get a false ID online, but it would require at least a little more effort if your intent was to cheat. Then getting a false ID would require a little more effort than is required now.
Senator Stein.
Representative Killian, it said that the purpose is to instill confidence that every time I go to vote, no one has voted for me. Well, every time I go to vote, I'm either checked off the list or I'm not checked off the list. And if I go to vote and somebody's voted for me, they will say, I'm sorry, you've already voted. At which point I will know that someone has engaged in fraud and presented themselves as me. I would like to know how many times that has ever happened in North Carolina, where someone has gone to vote and they said, I'm sorry, sir, you've already voted.
A couple of things. First of all, the direct answer to your question, Senator Stein, I don't know that that information exists. I don't know that there's a way for that information to exist.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up.
There is a way to know, and that's with the State Board of Elections, and they keep very elaborate tallies of the different types of fraud that is alleged to have occurred, and that doesn't occur. What does occur 7 to 10 times more is fraud through the mail. Absentee ballot is much more conducive to fraud than in-person fraud. What does your bill propose to do to absentee ballot fraud, which is 7 to 10 times more common?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill doesn't deal with fraud that would be committed through the mail. To get back to your first point, if I can speak to where my interest peaked in this bill. I have a constituent in my county who in the 2010 elections over the road trouble. He prides himself in going to polls to vote. That's his thing. That's his civic participation. He went to the polls to vote and was told, I'm sorry, his name, please don't laugh, his name happens to be John Smith, which I know is probably one of the most common names in the world. But it did happen to be the only John Smith registered at the Stewart Street precinct in Harnett County. When he went to vote, he was told that someone had already voted in his name. That is being disenfranchised.
Senator Stein, follow-up.
Well, I assume what happened, and I think it's a reasonable assumption, is John Smith did go vote. It was the John Smith who lived in another precinct. People go to vote in the wrong precinct all the time. And if they showed an ID saying that, yes, I am John Smith, then that person would have been allowed to vote for your friend John Smith anyway, under your bill. So your bill on its face doesn't address that problem. What I'm concerned about, in addition to the fact that we're fighting a phantom and we're not addressing the real problem, and by the way, it's interesting that if you look at the returns on on absentee ballots, Republicans do better than Democrats on absentee ballot voting. And so I do find it curious that that's the fraud that we're not confronting. The concern I have is practical. 10% of North Carolinians don't have IDs right now. So that's about 500,000 people. There's an article in today's paper that we have a couple precincts in Wake County that have 9,000 people. That's more than many counties in North Carolina, just a single precinct. So they're saying that they're expecting waits of a couple hours on election day. So I'm waiting in line a couple hours. I'm a senior citizen, I don't have the driver's license. At the end of the line, I find out I need to have a driver's license to vote. Everybody there knows me. I voted there my whole life. I now either have to go home and get to the back of the line again, which I'm not going to do, or I have to go to the county courthouse, which I'm not going to do. And so what we're doing here is putting barriers to public participation in the electoral process, which that is what we are. That is why we're here. And I find it very disconcerting.
Senator Abbott.
Mr. Chairman, there are some counties in the mountains that we have an incredible number of folks that passed away in cemetery voting, and it's very difficult for them to get to the poll with an ID. So, I think we need to let them rest in peace and move forward. I think we can sit here all day and we're going to argue this bill, and I think the vote's going to be the same. And I think it might be best for time consideration that we have a full-blown discussion when we go to the floor or maybe in appropriations. But I say now, let's just vote and move forward.
Okay, we do have a motion for approval on the floor. All those in favor of the motion, which is unfavorable as to the bill, favorable as to the PCS, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No.